So I'll just start out very quickly with about me. I've used Python since about 2.1. It's been on and off. Overall, that's about 11 years, but I wouldn't say I have 11 years worth of experience. Previously, I've worked as a software developer at the University of Sydney and a Django developer for an insurance company. And currently, I'm a customer solutions engineer at Google. That means mostly working with AdWords. And the disclaimer, the opinions stated here are my own and not necessarily those of my employer. I also don't work on App Engine. I'm just a user. So ask me questions about using it, but I don't know anything about roadmaps or anything like that. To start off with, today's talk is suitable for beginners. So anyone who thought that it was going to be really advanced, you're free to leave and find a more interesting talk. And those of you who don't necessarily have any knowledge of App Engine, you're perfect. If you have knowledge of App Engine and want to sit here and correct me as well, that's also fine. So I'm going to just go through a very brief introduction of how to use App Engine. I'm only going to use examples that output JSON, so it's we don't have to worry about templates or interfaces or anything here. I'm just going to be outputting JSON, okay? So you could use this as to back a web application that's going to be using JSON. And I'm going to show you some examples that use the data store, which is App Engine's storage mechanism. So why I like App Engine. I like that I can develop locally and upload to the cloud. So all the development work happens on my computer. I can run it locally on my computer. And then when I'm ready to deploy it, I upload it and everything ends up online. Has automatic scaling, so I don't have to worry that my server, if I'm hosting something myself separately, not on App Engine, I'd have to think about how many web servers I'm running, how many databases I'm running. With App Engine, everything just scales itself. I don't have to think about that. I don't have to worry about that. It has built-in load balancing. So if for some reason what I was writing became very popular, and it did scale to multiple servers, App Engine would load balance it across all those servers. And it's perfect for non-sysadmins like myself. I don't have much of a background in sysadmin. I can kind of muddle through and do some things, but when you're talking about doing massively scaled applications with multiple servers, I'm the wrong person for that. So having something where all the sysadmin's handled by somebody else, that's perfect. To get started, everything you need, you can download for Windows, Mac or Linux. This gives you the SDK. You'll also need Python of some variant. The examples I'm using today using Python 2.7. It also supports Python 2.5. There's no Python 3 version. So for the local development environment, it allows you to develop and test your application on your local machine, and then you upload it to the server. So to get yourself started, there's only 2 files that you need. So after you've installed the SDK, there's just 2 files that will get you started. You need your app.yaml, which is a text file that you write. It's actually a YAML file, which is a specific language. But as you see when I go into it, it's a very simple language to define your application. And this is the description of your application, the URLs that your application using, what files get uploaded, versions of Python that you're using, and so on. And you also need your code, so your Py file or an app. There's also only 2 commands you need. So from the SDK, there's really only 2 things that I use regularly from it. The first one is dev app server. This allows me to run the application that I'm building locally on my machine. And app config py update, which is how you put the code onto the server. App config has a lot of other commands associated with it, none of which I'm going to use today. So I'll just give you a the basic hello world example. Now this is the ultra basic hello world example. It's just outputting, it's essentially a CGI, it's outputting the content type and then outputting hello world. But using today's example where I'm going to be outputting JSON, I've got one here that basically takes a whole bunch of information, which is the countries that you're, a whole bunch of country names and their populations. So the data that I'm going to be dealing with today is just country names and population. And this is the kind of the most basic version of that. It takes a dictionary here of 5 countries and then outputs it the same way that Hello World example did, using a dump string from JSON library. All this does, it takes this dictionary and dumps it out as JSON. So it's the previous Hello World example on the front, just done for the data that I want. The app.yaml for this one, it needs a name. When you're developing locally on your app server, this can be anything you want. You only need to set it to something different when you're about to upload it. And that's the application name that you register on App Engine. The version number, this is a version number that you come up with yourself. It allows you to deploy multiple versions to App Engine at the same time. If you're only ever going to have one version deployed at once, you can just leave it on one. The version of Python that you want to use. So today I'm using Python 2.7, which is Python 2.7. The API version, currently it's just always set to 1. Python 2.7 on App Engine has threading. And because of some of the libraries I'm using today, I'm setting it to false. If you set this to true, it's saying that the server can use multiple threads to serve your application simultaneously. And then there's the handlers. I'm just catching everything and sending it all to the one code file that I've got here. Now I've got another window up here that I can bring it up in. And I can zoom this in a bit if so it was this is the whoops, no, gone too high. Okay, so this was the same code as before. And I'm just going to run it in the dev app server. I'll just zoom out a little bit. It's a bit too big. So I'll show you the app.yaml's in here as well. So I'll just run the dev app server. And here I can either specify the name of the application or just the location for the app.yaml, and the app.yaml's in this directory. So there's a few warnings coming up here. It's to do with the version that I'm running of it. There's some incompatibilities, but this is really where it starts down here. And it's basically saying that my application's up and running. So now I can go to localhost 8080, and it's outputting what we expected. I mean, it's a very simple file, so we'd be surprised if it did anything different. Go back to the slides. Okay. So this here is now taking the Hello World example that we have that's outputting the countries, and it's going one step further. It's using what we call, so there's my data. Same as before, it's unchanged, but we're using now what's called the web app framework. My examples today are compatible with the first web app 1, but we're using web app 2 here because that's the default in the Python 2.7 app engine. So what we've got here is we define a request handler. And then on that request handler, we can define different methods to do different things. So here I've got for a get method, which is what's happening when the user is coming to our URL. It's calling a get method. So when it calls the get method, I want to set the headers application JSON because it's JSON that I'm returning, and then I'm going to use the same JSON.dump string to dump out the JSON of this same dictionary here. So I'm doing the exact same thing. I'm doing it in a slightly nicer way. So I'm using the request handler here. I'll show you the example of this one here. So I just update my app YAML. I've got a file I've written for that one as well. Okay, so now we're running against the web app version. I know what I've done. This is what always happens when you do stuff live. So because we're now using the web app here, I can specify the script, and this is new in Python 2.7. As an app rather than as the Py file. So the server wasn't finding my code, essentially. There we go. So now it worked from the web app version. Now I'll just go back to the slides. Okay. So the next I'm going to talk about is the data store, or the high replication data store, because that's the database that backs the default database that backs App Engine, and it's often because people don't know about it and it works differently to other databases that people might be familiar with. It's often one of the major obstacles people overcome when they're writing before they write things on App Engine. So it's actually not that hard. It's quite simple. I'll just go through some of the details here. So it's a schemaless, non-relational database. It means you don't have a schema like you do in MySQL. And this is good for rapidly evolving applications. If you're developing something now, and every time you make a change to your data model, you have to, if you're using MySQL or another schemaed relational database, you need to go and change the schema and run the changes against the database. With this, you can just make the changes and put the data in there. It's also the default on App Engine now. The old one, which was the master-slave data store, is being deprecated. So it's probably a good reason to use it is that going forward, that's going to be sort of the default one. Again, it's highly scalable. It can expand right up to a huge scale, and so if you've got an application that's likely to expand, you don't really have to think about scale here. And it has built-in redundancy. It's the data is stored across multiple data centers, and eventually all of that data is they call it it's all the same. So once you make an update, it essentially propagates out to the other data centers. And it uses something here called the Paxos algorithm that I'm not going to go into detail of, but you're welcome to look that up. And it also supports SQL-like queries. I say SQL-like because it doesn't support a full feature set. It also uses an ORM, so you don't have to use SQL if you don't want to. Data in the database is stored as entities, and you can think of these similar to objects. I've got an example here using our same example that we've been using so far. So this is a data model for a country. So it's a class. So again, it is an object. Extends DB model. We've got two properties here. The name of the country and the population, which is a number. So a string property and integer property. there's a whole list of more properties. I mean, some of them string property, integer property, float property, date property. There's a huge list, and these all map back to various database properties that you might be familiar with. So that's how you create your data model. Putting data in is very simple. You make an object, you make an instance of the object, and then you call put on that object, and that submits it in. You can do more advanced things here to do batch processing, but for today we'll just leave it at this. Getting data. If I wanted to get every instance of this this data, I'd just use .all against the on the DB model. So now I've got another example that uses the data store to store it. So this, in the interest of brevity, it doesn't have much error checking in here. So feel free to jump in and correct me. In fact, it doesn't have any error checking in it. But basically, all I'm doing is creating the model. I'm reading in from a CSV file. I've got all of the countries. These are being done as single puts. Definitely could be done cleaner. This is possibly the simplest way, though. And then down the bottom here, I'm querying the I'm getting all the objects out, and then I'm formatting them so that they will appear the same way that we've been presenting the JSON before. The JSON dump-s doesn't take the database response. It could if you wanted to modify it, but I think it was a lot simpler just to format it slightly there and then use the dictionary that I formatted it. So I'll run this. And with a bit of luck. Okay, so what it's done is it's read from a CSV all of these countries. It's then written them into the data store, and then it's returned you all of these countries. Okay, so that's well and good, but you're probably not going to want all the countries at once. So the next thing that you want to do is you want to query that data. And there's a very easy way to query it. You can use the filter command and use the query parameters on it. So it could be something like, for this one, name equals, and then you can put the country name there. You could also do different operators. You can also use a thing to set up indexes on the data set. This is quite a small data set. It's only, I think, about 200 items in it. So I'm not going to go into indexes today, but I'll show you the modified example here that, oops, I've got the modified example that now queries the data. And we're just going to query it through the URL, so on the get string, which again is not ideal. You'd probably do it through a form, obviously, but since we're not focusing on the interface here. So it's the same example as before, but instead of just outputting the countries, okay, so it's not quite the same example. I'm using a different parameter here to get the query for country. It's actually the same as calling country.all on it, but you could do it to query different specify different objects. And then filtering it based on the query text that's coming through from the request. So I'll just change my app.yaml to point to the other So now if I come back here and I go country equals Singapore, there we go. Or something strange with the mouse. There we go. So those are different examples for querying it. So the next thing that I want to show you is just how to get this deployed. So for registering an app here, you simply go to appengine.google.com. You need to log in, and then you go create an application, and you fill out this form here. The only thing really you need is the application identifier. You check availability. I've already set one up. Here, OJ countries. You'll find the basic words are all already taken, so putting your name in there can often help. So already registered. Now we've got to upload the app. So the first app that I want to upload is actually the one that also puts the data in. So I'll just edit my app.yaml, and I'm going to upload the data store one first. Now when you upload it, you use the other command that I introduced at the start, which is appconfig, update command. And again, I could specify the location, but since it's in this directory, so this now goes through and it uploads to App Engine essentially all the files defined in the app.yaml, and it then does it checks to see if the application is online before it finishes. So that said deployment successful, and now it's checking that it's serving. Okay, so it's now serving. So if I go to the browser here, I should now be able to see it at oj-countries, which was my app's name, .appspot.com. And if everything's worked correctly, it will load the data in and output all the data. This is because my application's not written particularly efficiently. It's taking a little while. It's also because it has to spin up the first time, the very first time you hit an instance. But there we go. It's come back with the response. I can now go and have a look. If we go into the dashboard, which is the online it's basically an online administration and summary interface. It gives you information about how much you've used. You can see there's a spike there from earlier today when I originally tested uploading this application. You can see my daily usage down here and how much of certain quotas I've used. And I can also sorry, my mouse has gone haywire. Which doesn't normally happen on a Mac. You can also get to the logs over here. To see requests, errors, and so on. So I'll now upload my other version of the app. because I uploaded this already once today before, it actually saved my login details. Normally the first time you upload it, it'll ask you for your login and password to upload it. Inside the dashboard, you can also set permissions, so you can give other developers permission to also upload. It's under administration permissions. You can here you can add other developers, so you can have multiple developers working on the same application and give them all permission to upload. You can see their developer, owner, viewer. It looks like it's finished uploading. So now I just go to my live version here, and let's query that data. And again, it's the result we're expecting. Back in the dashboard, we can go into a data store viewer, and we can see the data that's here. So this is essentially a view of the database. You're probably not going to go in and use this to look through all your data, but it can be useful for debugging, for getting samples of data, for deleting data, and possibly for exporting or importing data. But more likely you're going to use other tools for that. There are other tools built into the system. So I'll just go back to the slides. So the dashboard there that we just saw. So I just want to wrap up here with why I like using App Engine. I find it's easy to get started. It's very quick. I mean, we wrote couple of very simple examples here. We tested them and then we deployed them. The data store can be very easy to use. It's not really something to be scared of. It's just a different type of database. It provides automatic scaling, and it's perfect for non-sysadmins like myself. So if you've got any questions, I'm happy to take them now.
What's your experience running things like Django and Tornado on App Engine?
Yeah, so I was previously a Django developer, so I have used Django a bit. I actually prefer App Engine using Web App, especially Web App 2, because it does give me access to some of the more useful parts of Django without having to do the whole structure of Django. In terms of porting something that is already in Django, to App Engine, it can be a little bit difficult, but it can be done. I think if you're starting from scratch, though, it's perfect to implement on App Engine. I haven't used Tornado on App Engine, so I can't really comment. But I like just using Web App 2. I think it gives you a lot of the useful features that you would have found in Django, but without all the overhead and structure that you need for Django. Yep.
I definitely second that personally. But, especially Jinja 2 is so much better for templating than what Django gives.
Right.
I know you don't need templating, and you're serving JSON, but if
yeah.
you need
yep.
templating. Anyway, have you tried NDB? The similar but enhanced DB version of DB that Guido has just finished and published?
No, I haven't looked at that yet.
Well,
I definitely should.
The big deal is it essentially includes all caching operations. You are not doing any caching, but normally in real apps,
yeah. I mean, if you look,
DB, you're always going memcache put,
exactly.
Memcache get.
If you look at my latency here, it definitely could use some caching.
Right.
I mean,
NDB, you don't have to think about caching because Guido van Rossum is thinking about it for you, which
okay.
I think is a pretty good
yeah.
value for no money, actually. But
so there you go, NDB.
it's very similar to .db, just...
okay. I'm just going to have a look. Is it available in App Engine, or do you upload it?
App Engine,
okay.
I believe 2.7 only.
Okay.
2.7 only. It was experimental until 3 months ago, but it was rolled out of experimental levels 3 months ago.
Okay. These slides I'm building into a tutorial. So if you guys want to see them, I'll publish a tutorial over the coming weeks that includes this information.
How about migration from 2.5 to 2.7? Is there any things that we need to take notes of?
I think if you're using the master-slave data store, you're going to have to upgrade. You're also going to have to update your YAML files and think about thread safety. There's actually, I think there's a guide online that goes through how to upgrade from to 2.7. So have a look for that. I'm pretty sure it's on the App Engine docs.
So the difference between Web App and Web App 2, what are the main changes?
So Web App was a very basic framework that was provided originally in App Engine. Then Web App 2 was, I believe it was an open source sort of extension done separately from App Engine, which it took a lot of the functionality that was useful out of other frameworks such as Django and rolled it into Web App 2. And since Python 2.7, Web App 2 has been available in App Engine. So it's backwards compatible with Web App, but it gives you a lot more functionality. So
Can we mix the two Web App and Web App 2?
you can write it as if it's for Web App, and it'll still run in Web App 2. And Web App is still available if you prefer in Python 2.7 under, I think the library is called Web App 1 there. Any other questions? Okay.